Let's do a test. 1, 2, 1, 2. Let's do a test. 1, 2, 1, 2. Excuse me. All right. Happy you guys are in today. Fantastic. We're going to get this going here in just a moment. Happy, what is it? Tuesday, October 25th, everybody. We've got a ton of stuff coming up. I'm actually going to adjust this just a little bit. There we go. There you go. We'll put that right here. All right. Let's rearrange this really quick. All right. Make sure the transitions are going. Fantastic. Super excited to have you guys all here today. I'm just going to get this pulled up and over. Just switching up the windows a little bit so you guys can see everything nice and clear. I'm totally used to having my Streamlabs over on the other screen, so this is going to be a little bit weird for me today, guys. But we are live streaming on YouTube for the first time, so we're super excited to have you guys here today. The idea is we want to reach a broader community, and YouTube has literally billions of people that use it. So we're just making that transition over. We're just going to see how this goes. I would love to see and make sure this gets as many views as possible. The goal of this podcast is to get as much information out as possible. We'll get started here in just a moment here, guys. Fantastic. So I do want to just give you guys a quick description, and you guys can see a written form of this as well. But today I'm going to be covering the next of our fundamental movements, which is going to be the push. This is going to be a classically undervalued movement. And now, actually, before I get into that, I'm seeing right away that we're actually, let me see, Tuesdays at 9:30 a.m. Guys, what are you doing? Who edited this? Where's the editing gremlin? I'm the editing gremlin. Shameful. Let's get that edited. There we go. All right, we're primarily broadcasting on YouTube, so let's switch that around a little bit. There we go. Nice. If you guys don't know or didn't see already, I do most of my editing on Canva. That's actually a super good place to edit things. Really, really nice. Hope everyone is doing well. We'll get started here in just a moment here, guys. That way. All right. Looks like the connection is saying it's excellent. Fantastic. Microphone's coming in pretty clear. All right. Dogs are napping underneath and on the couch, which is really, really good. That means I think we are ready to get started. All right, guys. Welcome to the Healthy Humans podcast. This is going to be episode number 12, I believe. So this is awesome. We're officially on, I believe, the 5th or 6th episode of season 2. It's been quite a, I believe this is episode number 5. Don't quote me on that, just because, again, I usually write a lot of these concurrently, so things do get lost in the shuffle just a little bit, but very happy to have you guys here today. This is going to be our first episode. We are recording live via YouTube. So really excited to see you guys. You guys can follow us on the channel, Healthy Humans Pod. Not a lot of subscribers right now, so we are hoping to build that as we go through. You guys can see me and find this podcast on quite a few other broadcasting platforms. So not only is the live recording going to be available on YouTube, you can also find us on Anchor, Spotify. Those are two concurrent companies. Anchor is actually owned by Spotify. You can also find us on Google Podcasts and Pocket Casts as well. Quite a few of you guys listen on Pocket Casts. We're super excited to have you guys here today. I do want to start off with just a big thank you to all of you guys who are listening so far. Listening and actually getting those watch hours is super helpful for me building this up and seeing what you guys like and what is going to be working best for you. And so that way I can just bring the most amount of quality content to you. So between the video production, audio work, writing, editing, and actual recording time, This is quite a project. So thank you for everyone who has listened in so far. I really appreciate you. You guys are the ones that keeps this going. That's also why we're switching over to YouTube, because the YouTube Partner Program is going to hopefully open this up to many more people, and that will actually make this more self-funded in a way that I don't necessarily have to rely on you guys paying me to get this moving. We can rely more on editing, or I should say more advertising dollars as we're going through and making more episodes, which means you guys don't have to pay as much, which is going to be fantastic and a little bit more preferable. We do have a Patreon. So if you are inclined to support us in that way, you guys are more than welcome to do that. We'll leave that in a description on the main video as well. Today we are talking about the push. This is arguably one of the most important movements for any gym bro out there, mostly because it's going to build that chest and tries, man. So we want to make sure we do talk about that today, but also talking about the utility of this in our everyday life. So that is going to be what we're talking about as we're going through. You guys are going to see the push actually manifest itself in a few different movements. So like classic push-ups, everyone's favorite activity. And we've got also things that are going to target the shoulders as well, like the seated shoulder press. All of our images are brought to you by simplyfitness.com. So let's make sure we actually can see that, because they make all these really, really good edited PNGs so that you guys can enjoy them. So let's get that up on the screen there. Fantastic. They are the ones that make these graphics. They do great work. So we're really excited to snag these and use them. So let's just go over the thesis here really quick here, guys. What we're going to be going over today is looking at the push, the basics of the movement and its benefits, the importance of the push in aging and overall function. We're going to go over that quite a bit. I do these types of movements with my older clients so much, because it does get down to the point where this movement is a little bit life and death. It's very, very important. It's crucial to function, and we're going to make sure we get a lot of that covered. And we're also going to talk about the effects of modern life on this movement as well. And we're going to go over some other things. So we'll be talking about movement progressions, joint checks, things like that. We have a few staples that we always go over when we're talking about our movements. So we'll make sure we cover all those as well. Make sure you guys have a little bit of coffee like this, and we'll get right in. So thank you guys again for sticking with us. All right. Coming up here, guys, we're talking about the basics and benefits. So when we're talking about the push movement, again, we did show two different exercise graphics for that, the push-up and the shoulder press, but the push can manifest itself in many different ways. So we want to make sure that we are targeting all of these different muscle fibers in different ways with different equipment, all that fun stuff, making sure we are getting a really, really solid workout. Where you might use this, we see pushing efforts a lot in sport. I was a lineman myself, so literally every single play had some sort of pushing involved, literally moving other humans. So we got to make sure that we're doing that. I'm going to angle this down just a little bit here, guys. There we go. Nice. That way I've got everything in, and I don't have to raise my hands to get everything done. That's kind of the nice thing about editing. Always fun. But we want to make sure that we'll focus a little bit on the sport application on this, but also just kind of the practical everyday implications of this as well, or applications, excuse me. A lot of the times you might see somebody pushing a car down the street. You may say, oh, well, my car doesn't break down that often, so I don't need to train this movement. But it's in those emergency situations quite often that we do find ourselves using the push movement. So we want to make sure we are training for that, so an emergency becomes less of an emergency because we are already prepared for it. And then you might see this in maybe your everyday activities as well. I see a lot of different people who have occupations that involve like pushing carts, forklifts, lots of different things. If something's got wheels and you got to move it from one place to another, usually that involves some sort of pushing. The muscles involved are going to be mostly your pectorals, which is your chest, your deltoids, which is your shoulder, and your triceps, which is the back of the arm. I'll try to stick to more of that basic nomenclature so that way when I am describing these, I'm not always using the actual muscular term, because I know that does lose some of you guys. So we'll refer to the chest, the shoulders, but the triceps, we'll keep that as we're going through. So we're going to talk about a few different isolated movements as far as the push is related to the upper body here today, guys. We're also going to be talking about using different movements, using different ratios as well. So we're going to be talking a little bit how surface area of the muscle is going to affect how much load you put on it, specifically activating between the chest, shoulders, and triceps. If you're targeting those muscles using isolation movements, you're going to see much different loads as you are going through. Next thing we're going to talk about here, guys, is we want to make sure we are talking about the importance in aging and overall function. Really, when it comes down to it, if somebody, as we age, we need to be able to get up off the ground or from a seated position into a standing position. A lot of times people will brace their hands on their chair and then push themselves up, right? That actually gets harder over time. That takes a lot of shoulder strength and tricep strength, and making sure we have that down is going to be really, really important. If not, what happens is people get stuck. Then they have to use awkward movement patterns to get themselves where they need to be, and this oftentimes can lead to overcompensations with certain muscle groups. It can lead to ineffective movements and potentially even injury as well. So we want to keep that to a minimum. We want to keep these movements as streamlined as possible and as strong as possible as well. We also want to make sure that these pushing groups are strong, because it's actually going to help keep our posture balanced as well. So the spine and the shoulders are basically set in place horizontally by the tension between the back and the tension between the chest. So we want to make sure that those are well balanced between each other. And then we want to talk about stabilizing the shoulder as well. If you don't know, the shoulder is actually made up of several different bones and joints. So when we think of the shoulder, a lot of times people will just say, oh yeah, here's your shoulder. But there's actually 3 different kind of articulation points as you go through, even if you're just looking at the bones. So we have your humerus, which is actually the portion of your arm. You have your clavicle, which is going to then attach to the scapula via the acromion. And all 3 of these are going to form a really, really important joint, the most mobile joint in the body. And then obviously the humerus itself is going to attach itself to the glenoid fossa as part of the scapula. You guys don't need to remember that. I'm not going to test you on that, so no worries. But essentially, that's the slightly rounded portion of the scapula that the humerus sits in and actually articulates against. So making sure all of that is properly balanced as well. There's a lot of different muscle groups that run in and around those. So we have like your major muscles that run over top, and there's a group of interior muscles that come into play as well. This is what we refer to as your rotator cuff. So the scapula itself has basically 4 different muscles that come in and around and actually wrap around the head of the humerus. And based on what muscles are pulling what ways, it actually helps create that rotational force around the arm. Now, this is a very easy muscle group to injure because these are internal muscles. They're very small. And if they're not trained and going through their range of motion, which we'll go through here in just a second, but you'll see on that screen here, guys, stronger means it lasts longer. That seems very simple and kind of stupid of me to say. You're just thinking, well, yeah, of course that makes sense. But we need to put that into practice. We need to actually get those muscles stronger so that they last longer. That's the whole point of this. And then also making sure we move through that range of motion. So ROM up on the screen here, guys, we'll abbreviate that for range of motion because it does take up a lot of screen time. So we'll make sure that we are just moving through those ranges. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the shoulder is the most mobile joint in the body. It has a lot of different movement planes that it goes through. So we've got flexion, extension. So that's the idea that the shoulder can move up or forward and backwards. You have your abduction moving away from the body, adduction moving in. You actually have retraction and protraction of the scapula. So it's the idea of those shoulder blades themselves moving back or moving forward. So to protract, to move forward, or to retract into the spine. And you also have that internal external rotation, a little bit of what we mentioned with that rotator cuff. So there is a ton going on here. So this is, again, the most mobile joint in the body. And if you have been somebody that has injured this before, you'll know quite easily how debilitating a shoulder injury can be. And that's actually what we're going to talk about next here, guys. So common injuries, we're going to see some of these are with time and some of these happen acutely as well. And an acute injury is the idea that something happens just like right away. And a chronic injury is something that kind of builds up over time. So a little bit different. They mean slightly different things, but a lot of times they have similar outcomes. So when we're talking about arthritis, this is something you probably associate with aging. This is something you might say, oh, well, I don't have to worry about this because I'm young, you might be sub 30 listening to this. I know a lot of my followers on Twitter are kind of like 35 and younger, and that's okay. But keep in mind, this is going to be you in 10, 20 years. These are problems that everyone deals with, especially arthritis. And arthritis can happen for a lot of different reasons. It can be genetically, you can be genetically disposed to arthritis. So you might just have less of that joint padding in there. An injury can also lead to arthritis later. So for example, if you dislocate your shoulder or you sublux it, which sublux is a partial dislocation, you might damage the connective tissue that's interior to that shoulder. So once it gets set, it might still not be fully functioning. And that's pretty normal. Some people don't fully recover from those sorts of injuries. So we want to make sure that we are covering that as well. But basically, arthritis means that those bones, again, when that you have the shoulder, that glenoid fossa of the scapula and then the humerus, essentially there should be a little bit of space in here between connective tissue and synovial fluid that essentially like cushions those two together. And then over time, that gap actually gets smaller and smaller. And so those bones actually become in contact with each other. Bone is a very hard material. And so when it rubs on each other, it's essentially grinding down and actually breaking down that bone. And that actually can cause a few other complications as well. So general arthritis, or it can also cause bone spurs. Bone spurs is essentially the cells in your body, in your bones particularly, are trying to repair that, but they deposit the bone in all the wrong areas. And so they create these like bony abnormalities, which actually cut into more of the connective tissue. It can cause scar tissue to form. It'll reduce range of motion. It can be painful. And so we see that quite a bit as well. Then we'll move into tendinopathy. So tendinopathy just being something, basically just damage to any of the tendons involved in the pushing movement and stabilization of the shoulder. So we see bicep tendinopathy is a pretty common one. And you might say, well, bicep is actually not a pushing muscle group. It's not. But the bicipital tendon runs in a groove down in front of that humerus. So if the shoulder itself is not well regulated, that groove can actually either, depending on how the tendon is sitting in the groove, or if something happens to the bicep because of what the shoulder is doing, again, we develop these compensatory motions. Everything's connected. Just because something's a pulling muscle group and not a pushing muscle group, you can still see these get affected. Sometimes we'll see wearing down of that tendon or inflammation, and then we start to see that tendinopathy start to form. We'll also see things like AC joint tears. So AC is acromioclavicular. You can use that in a sentence however you want, but the AC joint is essentially the joint that actually connects that small bit of that protrusion from the scapula to our clavicle. That means as the clavicle and the arm raises, these raise together and not as two separate units, which is actually a really good thing. We like those being nice and secure. But a lot of times that joint can come under tension or even tear, and that does reduce range of motion, especially in that overhead mobility. Then we're going to talk about rotator cuff. Oof. This one's a tough one here, guys, because we see this a lot in like throwing sports, not as much anymore, which is good. But a lot of times actually when we're in throwing sports, we're seeing a lot of like elbow injuries now instead of shoulder injuries, because we've gotten decently good at training the shoulder so that rotator cuff injuries don't happen, which is really cool. But now we're starting to see like things like lateral and medial epicondylitis, especially in pitchers when they're, really throwing that elbow. I don't know if you guys have ever seen those like slow-mo pictures of like a pitcher and their arm is like all the way back here. I'm like, it hurts my elbow just thinking about it. But now we're seeing it kind of a prevalence of like Tommy John surgeries instead of rotator cuff repairs, which is not good. So we don't really want to see that, but the rotator cuff does get torn every once in a while. The rotator cuff's made up of 4 different muscles. I won't bore you guys with those right now, but that is very, very important because if the arm can't rotate, it becomes very, very limited. Even though you might be able to flex, extend, abduct, and adduct, ABD or ADD. Those are always fun to say. Abduction, like taking away, like bringing it back closer. That's how I always remember it. But if you don't have that internal rotation, it actually limits a ton of different movements you can do, including pushing, but also pulling movements as well. So making sure that is basically tracking how we need it to is very, very important. Impingement is another one as well. So a lot of times that when we're referring to impingement itself, that's the idea that part of the rotator cuff and those tendons actually run underneath some of these structures because, again, they're internal to the shoulder. They're not all just outside. So what happens is if these bones are not moving in quite the right way, a lot of times those bones will pinch down on those tendons, which causes impingement, which can be very painful. And then we also see things like frozen shoulder as well. Frozen shoulder is a little bit more difficult because it's not always super clear what causes it, but it's essentially a lack of use, function, and range of motion in that shoulder. So all of these coming into play here, guys, it's really, really important that we train these muscle groups so that we can at least reduce the incidence or the severity of these injuries. Because again, if some of these things are genetically based, it might be something you're not able to get away from. But if it is more situational based, just based on lifestyle, we can make sure that we are preventing that as much as we can. All right, coming up next, we've got our joint check. So this is one of the classic things we like to cover here, guys, every single time as we're going through. So we're just going to do a joint check on the push-up. This is kind of the classic pushing movement. You don't need any weights or equipment to do this. You just need body weight. And there's a lot of different modifications you guys can use for this as well. But we've got 5 different checks in the upper body here, guys, and we'll have one in this bottom portion as well. But this is going to be specifically referring to that elbow. So when we are looking up at the head here, guys, you're going to notice that his gaze is down towards the ground. The head is not being cranked up and trying to see forward. You should be looking at the ground because that's actually going to keep that neck in line with that thoracic spine all the way down. So there should be the straight line all the way from the top of the head to the heels. Nice and straight, nice and neutral spine, great posture. Then what we're looking for is the shoulder blades. Now, the shoulder blades are a little bit tough because some people have what we call scapular winging. Now, we didn't talk about that in our injuries because this isn't necessarily an injury, but it does cause instability, which can cause other issues as well. So scapular winging is usually caused by weakness in the serratus anterior, and you can also just train this muscle by doing what we call scapular push-ups. So that's actually getting into this plane of motion, into this plank position, and actually just like retracting and protracting the scapula while keeping the arms straight. It's not a lot of like overall body movement, but it's really, really good. So we want to make sure that those scapula are in the right place and not excessively winging while we're going through. Third check is we are going to be looking at the low back. A lot of times I see people when they're getting in that push-ups and they let their belly kind of hang down a little bit. That core is not engaged and their low back hangs down. That usually happens when the arms are not actually strong enough to support that movement because people will want to bring their body as close to the ground as possible, usually pushing those hips down, but the arms actually stay pretty straight. And that's a hard one to correct for here, guys, but it does take time. That's why we go over all these different movements, and that's going to be really important with progression as well. So core strength, arm strength, it all blends together. Excuse me. Next one here, guys, we're looking at the hips. So we've all probably seen that person before who is doing push-ups with their hips up in the air. And I'm actually here to tell you that that's not always a bad thing. A lot of times, a average Joe or average Jane coming into the gym is not going to be able to just rep out a set of push-ups. And yeah, I know that's not a great thing, but that's why we do this podcast. We want people to get to the point where they can make progressions on their own health and we can see those outcomes as far as strength, endurance, power, core stability, all of those things. So you might see somebody with their hips up in the air. And yes, that's not perfect push-up form, but if they're actually going through that movement and using their arms, I would rather them start off with that movement and then slowly progress them out of using like their hips up in the air, because that's going to lever some of your weight away from the body. It's going to use the shoulders a little bit more. And, you know, we can use that. That's not always to say like if somebody just can't do a push-up, maybe they'll have their hips up in the air. But there are also, I have some favorite modifications that I use of my own because I would rather have that core completely engaged. So again, sometimes people will do that, but if somebody's under my supervision, I'm going to give them this next joint check, which is going to be from the knees. So when you were looking at this push-up, I mentioned when we were talking about the head, we want a straight line from the top of the head all the way down to the feet. The feet are going to be our pivot point to the ground here. Now, if I have a client that cannot do a full plank push-up, what I'm going to have them do is actually bring their knees to the ground, maintaining a straight line from the knee all the way to the head. And this is going to reduce the amount of weight that they have to push. It's going to create a shorter lever, and it's going to give them more strength to actually get all the way down to the ground, or at least 4 inches from the ground, and be able to push back up. If you're not able to do this, another option you can do is actually either doing a plank position off of an elevated surface, so like a bench or something like that, or having your knees on the ground and using an elevated surface as well. Those are both great ideas for really reinforcing that good posture that we're really looking for, and then moving on and being able to progress that movement from there. Last joint check we want to talk about here, guys, is elbow angle. You can see as this very nice cartoon man is going through his push-ups, his elbows are actually going back towards the body, and there's a little bit of separation between the elbow and the torso. What I see all the time is if we're looking at a top-down view, or from my perspective, a bottom-up view, people's elbows will go straight out to the side when they're doing a push-up. Not only does this put a lot of pressure on the wrist because the wrist is trying to rotate as they're going through that movement, it is also putting a lot of impingement force on the shoulder as well. So I usually tell people, if you're looking at that arm from the top, that arm should be at about 45 degrees when you're pressing back and forth. This is going to keep that shoulder from impinging itself, and it's going to keep that shoulder a lot healthier and give you a little bit of a better workout as well. So if you guys have any questions about the joint check, feel free to drop those in the comments as you guys are listening in. Really appreciate that. And we'll make sure we just keep on going. All right, just double checking connection here. Fantastic. Coming up next here, guys. Whoops. That is a slide from another title. There we go. It's been a long week here, guys. Our last talking point of the day is going to be the modern society and the decline of the push. So I think one of the main issues with this not being a super common movement or not being as functional as it used to be is that we just live in a society that no longer relies on as much manual labor across the entire population. Now, obviously, there are people who still do manual labor jobs, and that's very, very good. We still need those jobs. And, right now, I won't go into the ways that capitalism has failed these people, but as a society, we do want to move towards like people having to do less work with the same outcome. That's like the whole point of technology. But generally, we are more sedentary than we used to be. Pushing movements are heavily involved in manual labor, which again, we just don't do that much. So this really highlights the importance of us going through exercise. We need to be able to move heavy objects. You might not be able to lift something over your head. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, or you go into your garage or your storage closet or whatever it might be, and you got a heavy box up on the top shelf. You got to be able to pull that off, suspend it with those shoulders, and then bring it down safely. A lot of people hurt themselves on ladders and things like that. If you have a strong chest and shoulders, you're able to go through these movements a lot easier. And then we also talked about just getting up and off the ground. Those movements usually start with a push. If you want to get down and play like with your dogs or your kids or nieces, nephews, whoever it might be, or if you're just being a silly Billy and you want to be on the ground for a little bit, that's totally fine. But usually it involves a little bit of pressing to get yourself up off the ground so you can get your feet underneath you. But if you're not able to do that, then you have to kind of develop these strange movement patterns that, again, might lead to other issues in the future as well. And really it comes down to here, guys, this is why we have to spend time in the gym. Like, we need that time. Sitting is one of the worst things you can do for your body. We sometimes will refer and say like sitting is the new smoking. It really is. It is very, very dangerous for your health to just sit all the time and not be active. The body is meant to move. So because it's not getting that movement anymore, it is going to regress. If it's regressing, it's going in the wrong direction. We don't want that for you guys. Next, we'll go over your movement progression. So you're going to see a lot of different exercises here, guys. We're going to talk about adding load and varying up your equipment as well. If we never get to the point where we progress here, guys, it makes it harder to continue seeing those benefits. So we want to make sure that when we're going through that push, we can see a few different ways to improve those muscles. Some people, I will not lie, people will train for aesthetic reasons, and that is totally okay. If you want your shoulders and your chest to look nice, go for it. But we're going to stick to more of the functional approach to this because we do want to target those muscle groups. So we've got 4 different movements here, guys. We are going to be looking at the decline barbell press. So we've got our gentleman right here pressing this up. We've got our cable chest fly, an inclined dumbbell chest fly, and then an incline press as well. The reason we're including all of these different movements is because these are going to target slightly different muscle configurations and muscle fiber types. So that way, if you are incorporating all of these, you can get a slightly different workout using different movements and add a little bit of variety into your routine. Variety is the spice of life. Variety is also the spice of exercise. So make sure to switch it up a little bit so that way you guys don't get bored with your routine. A lot of the times, broad shoulders, I'll go back to aesthetics here for just a minute here, guys. If you're someone who does want to train for having a bigger chest or bigger shoulders, I don't necessarily like relate with that just because I'm really Scandinavian and I'm kind of a big dude myself, but like some people are not born that way. You can give the same exercise routine and diet plan to everyone on earth and people are still going to look different. Totally get that. But some people want to build up those muscles for aesthetic reasons. The nice thing is like broad shoulders tend to usually give the illusion of a more narrow waist. I see this a lot in my clients is like if I have, especially with my male clients, all the time. They're like, hey, I want to get my chest nice and big. That is a point that they want, whether or not it's for their spouse or significant other or just for themselves, totally okay. A lot of times with my female clients, they just want to tone their arms and their shoulders so that they look and feel as good as possible. And that's really what it comes down to. If my client is going to feel better in their body, then that's the result we're looking for. It's going to keep them in the gym. It's going to keep them moving. But if they are feeling better and their mental health is going to benefit from that, that's all I want. I don't want people to constantly be chasing something they can never achieve, but I do truly want my clients to get to the point where they feel good and confident about the work that they're doing. And I think that's important for everybody. All right, guys, coming up next, we're going to just go over a workout update as well. So some of the stuff I like to go over with you guys involves some of the workouts that I do. So I'll get you guys over so you guys can see what's going on here. So with these, you guys can see I've got 3 different screenshots of some of the workouts I was doing last week. I meant to get all 5, but did not quite get there. And you can see the heart rate response for 3 of my workouts at the bottom of the screen, and we'll go over those here in just a minute. I mentioned in our last episode that I did get new shoes, which meant I am now returning to running, which is going absolutely fabulously. With these new shoes, my feet feel better, my ankles aren't as tight, my knees don't hurt as much, and my hips feel so much better. Although that being said, I'm probably going to have to make sure that I replace these shoes fairly often, which is going to be expensive, which does kind of suck. At the beginning of the month here, guys, we did set a goal of about 3,000 points or about 100 points a day. And it is October, so you're probably saying, hey, Nathan, that means you need to get 3,100 points a day if you're going to make it all the way through Halloween. And you're right. That's still kind of my goal as we're going through. So in these last 3 workouts, this is just Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, respectively, going from left to right on that screen. You can see this is just the cardio portion of my workout. This doesn't even include the weightlifting or anything like that. So we cleared 100 points by quite a bit on all of these workouts, but you can also see a little bit of a heart rate response as we're going through. Not every day produces the same response. So if you look at Monday's workout, we got 70 points and we burned 372 calories. That's that little fire in the top right-hand corner of that first square. Fantastic. We were rested after the weekend, didn't start getting into those higher heart rate zones until really that 4th interval. That's okay. A little bit in that 3rd interval, but we just touched into that 80% zone for like a few seconds and then came back down. Then we move on to Tuesday. So we got 20 extra points. And you might be saying, well, yeah, because you had an extra minute on that warm up. Keep in mind, the time doesn't always, all of these workouts use the exact same time for warm up and the exact same time for our intervals as well. The overall time varies because when I put my heart rate monitor on, it does change a little bit based on how long it actually takes me to like fill up my water bottle and like actually get to the treadmill, things like that. So it's going to look a little bit different every single time. So in that second workout, we got 90 points and burned 463 calories. You can see in that second interval here, guys. So if I highlight this right here, that's when we're starting to see that yellow start to creep up. So you can start to see fatigue is setting in. So we have higher or longer bands of yellow in that heart rate zone, and it started happening earlier as well. And this is a peak zone training method. So what that means is we're starting off at a certain speed and then increasing 0.1 miles per hour until we get to a certain peak. And then we start working our way down 0.1 miles per hour as well. So that way the peak is nice and even. So you would think this would look symmetrical, but we're also building up intra-workout fatigue as well, rather than in external fatigue as well, just from day to day. And then we see with a little bit less time. We still got about 84 points in the 30 minutes one, but again, the calories are pretty lined up. There's only a few minutes difference, and really that's just from the extra time of that heart rate monitor being on. Pretty happy with these as we're going through. Today, I'm currently at 2,501 points, and I haven't even worked out today, so I'm actually ahead by quite a bit. Super excited about that. So I should be set to go. I'm actually hoping by the end of this week, before Halloween and the weekend even come around, to have hit my point goal. So really excited about that here, guys. All right. Next, we'll get into viewer questions. We didn't get any viewer questions from you guys online this week, but I did get some from some IRL clients as they were going through, and I got some pretty like tough and deep questions coming from some pretty like frustrated people. And frustration happens quite a bit in the gym here, guys. And so what I want to talk about here today is why the question I got was specific to this client, but they were saying, why am I not getting results? And the thing is people want results to be instantaneous. The body changes at a certain rate, and that rate actually does vary person to person, genetics to genetics. So it's hard to say that, oh, if you do this exact program for 3 weeks, you're going to look like this, and you're going to see this amount of change. That's hard to say, because if you give the same exercise program, the same nutrition plan, the same amount of sleep, if you controlled every single factor, but kept everyone in their original bodies and gave that same lifestyle plan to everyone, people would still look different. That's just something people need to know about. And that's a hard pill to swallow. So I do want you guys to keep that in mind. But this came from a point of frustration. You know, this client is like, hey, these people all look fantastic while they're working out, but they're like barely doing anything. And I'm over here, I'm like kicking my own butt, things like that. And why am I not seeing results? It takes time to build up muscle. It takes time to burn fat. And it takes an incredible amount of patience and dedication to stick with a workout plan. So that's what I said. That wasn't the answer people wanted to hear, but that is essentially what it takes. Without the use of drugs, you can only move the body in a certain direction at a certain pace. There is going to be a point where you either taper off or stop seeing results. That being said, it does vary, again, person to person. Some people have really fast metabolisms. Some people have really slow metabolisms. You also get to the point where when you do start losing weight and you do start building muscle, your body's actually going through a lot of hormonal changes as well. Because fun fact, when you lose weight, your body thinks you're dying. It thinks you're starving. So it actually has survival mechanisms put in place that makes it harder to lose weight. So if you're somebody who is trying to lose weight and you say, oh my gosh, I'm so hungry when I'm like trying to do this diet, all these things, it's like, yeah, because your body is producing those hormones as those fat cells start to decrease in size and value, essentially in caloric value. And your body's like, whoa, like alarms are going off up in the brain stem. And, you know, your body thinks you're dying. It thinks you're starving. So it's going to trigger that hunger response so that you are more likely to go out and forage for food. That's what it thinks it's doing. So your brain is trying to keep you alive, but little does it know, like you might have a desk job and you don't need all that extra weight. So I usually tell people it takes time. And the hard part is that if you are able to do and make these changes more slowly, I find that they are actually more likely to stick around. And the reason is because if you make changes a little bit slowly over time, you're doing a couple of things. So you're going to build healthy habits, which we talk a lot about in How to Get Started. That's the first episode of this podcast. So I really hope you guys listen to that. It's actually our most listened to episode right now. So please keep listening. That would make me super happy. But you're building healthy habits. Habits need to become a lifestyle. You can build a healthy habit in like 2 or 3 weeks. Whether or not that becomes an actual lifestyle you do is just going to take time. That means you're going through all of the different seasons. Can you maintain your lifestyle through the holidays, which we are coming up into? This is going to be the busiest time of year for me, guys. So this is also why I'm trying to get this content to you guys now, because in January, I might not be able to do this anymore because I am a trainer and the most busiest time of year is the beginning of the year because people set New Year's resolutions. I actually wish that wasn't a thing. Small tangent here. I don't wish that was a thing. I wish people would just come to the conclusion that they need to be healthier right here and now and never necessarily wait until they get to the point where they're like, oh, I guess it's the new year. I guess I'm going to change this. I would rather people just get healthy right away. So that's my little thing. We do have a few questions coming in from chat as well here, guys. So we'll get to those here in just a minute. But I do want to finish off the thought I was saying, and it just takes time to make those changes. If you make those changes small increment by small increment, again, your body is going to go through less of those really drastic hormonal changes as well. And it's actually easier to cope with. So if you're trying to lose as much weight as possible, as fast as possible, you're going to trigger a pretty big hunger response. It's a survival response. But if you set your goal to a smaller calorie deficit every week and just become okay with the fact that, hey, I'm going to increase my exercise volume, I'm going to decrease my calorie load maybe by like 5 to 10%. That also does include that, like, if you're going to really get serious about this, you need to track things in your phone with a scale. You need to be accurate. Accuracy is like really, really important. And if you're not doing that, you're going to waste your time essentially. So make sure you're doing everything accurately here, guys, but do so at a rate that is sustainable. If you're going to cut your diet in half and expect to see long-term results, like, good luck. Like, that's going to be really, really tough, and very few people can do that. But if you make small changes over time, you're going to see that really, really pile up. We've got a question in the chat from Panic. It looks like, I have hurt my shoulder in the past, rotator cuff. Now my shoulder ligaments seem to slip if I move them in a certain way. What are some good exercises I can do to help? Fantastic question here, Panic. We're going to get right into that as well. So when we're looking at the rotator cuff itself, we want to make sure that I'm going to lower this just a little bit. We are using the rotator cuff in a way that is beneficial for it. So a lot of times I will recommend, if you have dumbbells, you can do these laying on your back, but a lot of times it's going to involve a little bit of like rotation. So internal and external rotations with the arm. Really, really good. You can also do this standing with cables. So if the cable is going out from the side and you're pulling in, that's your internal rotation, or you can externally rotate when the cable is facing the midline of the body. Keep in mind, your internal rotations are stronger than your external rotations. External rotation targets the small muscle on the back of the shoulder, whereas the internal rotation, when we're coming in towards the body, is targeting the chest here. This is going to help quite a bit more than that rear deltoid and some of those smaller muscles in the rotator cuff. So making sure you load these really, really light. We're talking like a couple of pounds, like anywhere from 3 to 5 to start, and then slowly increase over time. That can be really, really good. So if you're laying on your back, rotating that hand out to the side and then back in, you can also do the side lying as well. So that way you guys can change those up a little bit. Panic, thank you so much for asking questions in chat. That's what we are here for here, guys. So making sure you guys are sharing this around. If you guys have more questions, you can also comment them down below. So if we don't get to them in the live chat, we can get to them later and we can get you guys all taken care of. All right, guys. Fantastic. What we're going to go over next here, guys, is one of my favorite parts of the podcast, and we're going to go over all of our listeners and their locations. So what I'm going to do really quick is we're going to take me off the screen there so you guys can see the entire map. One of my favorite things here, guys, is just going over all of the different places that you guys are listening from. So we've got quite a few listeners in the United States. That's actually where most of our listeners are right now. Our top state right now is Washington. That's our home state. So whoop, whoop, super excited to have you guys listening in from the home state of Washington. Super happy to have you guys all here. Thank you so much for listening. Our other states, we also have in order of how many listeners we have. So we can kind of change this up a little bit. If we get everyone on there, this might be a little tedious to update every week, but we'll see. But we've got California, Indiana, Texas, Ohio, Oklahoma, Florida, North Carolina, New Jersey, and Oregon. You guys are also going to notice some of those pins on the map as well in order of most popular to least from all these different countries here, guys. Outside of the US, we have Belgium. Love you guys over there. Fantastic. We've got the UK. So we've got our friends from across the sea. We've got Sweden, India, Czech Republic, Spain, and Australia. So thank you guys all so much for listening in. We're super happy to have you guys here. Always happy to get as many of those countries on there as possible. I want to load that map up. I want to see as many different pins on that map as possible. So make sure you guys share this around here, guys. Again, that was one of the reasons we transitioned over to YouTube, is so that we could actually get a larger listener base and so that you guys could enjoy this a little bit more as well. So you guys can find us in quite a few places. We'll just kind of finish this out here, guys, so that way you guys can get on with your day and hopefully get some healthy habits started here today. So thank you guys so much for listening. Really, really appreciate it. The best way you can help us out right now is by watching these episodes. That watch time, questions, feedback, likes, comments, subscribing, those are going to be the things that help build this thing up. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode here, guys, I want to switch away from Twitch because I don't want constant subs and bits and things being the way to fund, because that means you guys are paying me to do this. What I want is this to be an outlet where people can enjoy and consume this content and learn for free. And so that means we need those watch hours. If this becomes a partner program with YouTube, they're actually much more generous than Twitch as a platform as well. I'm still going to be doing some gaming content over there as well, so I don't necessarily want to count you guys out as well, but I think YouTube is going to be the way to go moving forward. And who knows, we're just trying to adapt with the times here, guys. I'm trying to make this as accessible for you guys as possible. But again, it does take a lot of time, and I do work a full-time training job. So I want to make sure that we can get this out to you guys. Where you guys can find us throughout the week is on Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and Spotify. Would really love to get more of you guys listening on Google Podcasts, just because that's the kind of the lowest viewed platform that we have right now. You guys can find that on my Twitter at Finley the Dog. I do a lot of like kind of my overall content from that page, so make sure you guys follow me on there. We do a lot of different gaming content. I love gamers. Gamers, you guys are my people. But we tend to also be the people who don't move as much. So I want to make sure that you guys are getting all the love that you guys deserve. So make sure you guys follow me on all my different platforms. I can put those all in the links of the description as well. The more questions I get from you guys, the more I can answer. I would love to get a flood of questions so that I can start doing AMA episodes as well, or Ask Me Anything episodes. These are going to include questions related to each episode's topic, so you guys can send those in to me on Twitter, Instagram, or the podcast email, which is healthyhumanspodcast@gmail.com. You can also comment them here on the actual video. That's totally fine. Wherever you can find me is okay. You guys can find me throughout the week at Finley the Dog on Patreon, Instagram, and Twitch, and Finley the Dog on Twitter. You guys can also find me on YouTube at Finley and Theo Entertainment. Outside of this, that's my gaming channel. Healthy Humans Pod is the channel you're watching this right now. So please consider going through and liking this. Listen to more of the content here, guys. The more likes and watch time and views we get, the more that gets support. And again, you guys don't have to pay for that. You're essentially paying for that content with your time. So I'd really, really appreciate that as you are going through. If you guys have any questions about that or anything, just let me know. We'll finish out with kind of like the boring legal stuff here, guys. So remember, all information discussed on this podcast does not constitute medical advice, and you should always consult your physician before starting an exercise program. Let's end with our 3 rules here, guys. Remember, when you guys are working out and hopefully staying nice and active, make sure to move around and stretch after you finish a workout. Movement is medicine. Let's get that blood flowing, and let's keep that recovery game nice and strong. Make sure to drink a lot of water, preferably more water than coffee, as I totally don't drink coffee at the end of the episode here. Probably need to heat it up, but that's okay. And most importantly, guys, have a great rest of your day. We will see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much for stopping by. You guys are all the best.